Show me off, call my son, change my name, bless my song. Now the blessing can't turn down. So me have a boss, my daddy is the.
Good evening and welcome to Blend Up. My name is Christopher Ram. Thank you for joining me. And over the next hour, we will be discussing political issues. And to do that this evening with and for me is no less than the Honorable Aubrey Norton, Leader of the Opposition, who has finished just between 4 and 5 months as leader. In tonight's Plain Talk, which I understand is also going live on Channel 9's Facebook page, I'll be discussing with him his assessment of his own performance and the state of the economy and the performance of the government and all the related issues during that time. So, Mr. Norton, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Chris, and good evening to your listening and viewing public.
You were appointed sometime in April as leader of the opposition. That puts you close to 5 months. When you became leader, I take it Aubrey Norton is a household name in politics in Guyana. You've been around at least the 70s.
1972.
Yes. You are known for your street smarts in politics, if I can say so. You're an academic yourself. You've been in foreign affairs. So you've dabbled in several areas and branches. When you were appointed leader of the opposition, what were the goals, what were the main goals you set yourself for your tenure as leader of the opposition?
First, to ensure that all the members of parliament understand the functions of the opposition. A lot of times people say the opposition is functioning, they aren't functioning. Many of our members of parliament were inexperienced, and so I thought one of the things that was critical was to ensure members of parliament understand what their functions are. The second thing I thought we need to do, which is still being done, is to identify the various sectors and have like think tanks that are providing information and working with the opposition so that the issues in the society could be discussed not only among members of parliament but with the wider society, etc. I thought that was important. It was also important that we set up a legislative agenda to know the things that we will deal with in the legal realm, because politics also has a legislative element in the sense that you make laws, you amend laws, you preserve laws, depending on your perception. So you have to work on a legislative agenda. Then politics is also about the support to the people. One of the areas we have been very, very weak and we are seeking to develop is public relations. Not only did we inherit a weak public relations program, but we also do not have access to a lot of the media outlets. Unfortunately, we were in power and we didn't deal with this issue of ensuring we ourselves have a functioning set of media outlets that we can get our message out. So that, one, we have to deal with what we have now, and two, to develop approaches to ensure we get to the point of having the kind of capacity to get our message out. Then it became important to be in touch with the people, to be able to understand the plight of the people on the ground, and to be able to represent their interests. Today I got a call from Little Africa, where we went, where no work was being done, and people were calling to say thanks to the opposition exposure of...
Where is this place?
Little Africa. It's in Kurivaton.
Okay.
On your way up there, you got Little Africa, and you have Little India, both of which we visited.
Because I know you got Little Zambia, I believe.
No, Zambia.
Zambia. That's correct, yes, yes.
So, one of the key functions of the opposition is exposure. Exposing corruption, exposing incompetence, etc. And so we set ourselves the task of exposing the wrongs in the society. Now, to do the exposing, you need to set up a network so that people provide you with information. You also need to be on the ground to get first-hand information. But exposure must also be linked to education. You're not just exposing for the sake of exposing. You're educating people. When, for instance, you expose what is wrong in a particular area, you must educate people on what is the correct thing and what approach should be taken. So, a lot, as leader of the opposition, it was felt that you had to reconnect with the ground, be on the ground, and create these sources of information so that you get information from people, you impart information, and in the very process you educate. Now, the critical task of the opposition is to represent people. And so you have to put mechanisms in place to represent people. The great task with representation is that when you have a set of members of parliament, they themselves must understand that they have to represent people and they have to be on the ground with people. And that is a challenge we still have to overcome. There are many who believe that being in parliament is the thing. But really, you're in parliament to represent people. And unless you have a core of people who are prepared to represent people, who are part of a program of representing people, we can run into problems. So, as I see it, it is really a case of creating a core of people in the opposition who understand their functions, and to... Your next task is really to portray yourself as the government in waiting, where you begin to identify policies that you will implement on becoming the government. And so one of the things we set out to do from the inception as opposition is to begin to identify the tenets of our vision so that we can outline to people a clear vision as to where we want to take Guyana. We have been saying that we want to develop a people-centered vision, a vision that focuses on all of the people of Guyana, ensuring all of the people of Guyana benefit. And that critical to that vision is a poverty alleviation and reduction program, in which, in outlining the new vision, we outline and develop policies and programs to reduce poverty. It is also important in the vision to make it clear to the people of Guyana that you disagree with how Guyana is being run at this stage, and you want to place Guyana on the foot of good governance, where there is transparency, accountability, and equity as we proceed with these programs. So I would say it is the achievement of those things that we are pursuing as opposition.
Well, it's quite
Maybe one last one,
Sure.
When I became the new opposition leader, one of the critical tasks we had to undertake was to engage the international community and to outline our positions to them and to create the conditions for engagement and to develop the kind of relationship that will redound to the benefit of both the opposition and the international community. And so that was also pursued.
It's quite a task, but that's what one would expect of any government, and any opposition, any parliament, any country. Now, some of these matters you've identified, obviously there were personnel changes. But as you emerge as leader of the opposition, it was following a 5-year period in which your party was the principal component in the government. So it's not like you're coming without ideas. It's not like you're coming without personnel. How would you assess, given this long list here, how much could you say, okay, we can now go back, look at all the budget speeches, all the policy statements, and say, we didn't manage to do A, B, C, and D, but we will continue to push for them whilst we're in opposition. Did you do that exercise?
Yes, in some regard. If you look at, I saw today that the Ministry of Education said they start a feeding program in Linden. In our review, we know that the administration between 2015 and 2020 began to develop a feeding program,
yes,
for children at different levels. As I understand it, this was based on an assessment of poverty in the society. That assessment found that children went to school, some didn't go, and that you had to find mechanisms to get children in school. And so the APNUAFC at the time decided that you had to provide them with these meals. You had to ensure that they have the means to go to school, boats, bicycle, buses, particularly in the riverine areas. A lot of the children couldn't go to school because they didn't have the resources. And even until now, when you go into the Pomeroon or the Berbice River, all of which I've visited, people complain that the cost to get children to school too high. And so it is our view that this was one very good and important element of the APNUAFC that we will pursue, and that we will pressure the government consistently with calling the government to ensure our children are provided at least 2 hot meals so that they can perform in school.
You want to give me a couple other few other examples, maybe in the arena of your legislative agenda, identification of issues, institutional strengthening? You want to give some examples of those?
In my opinion, our legislative agenda was not strong as a government. That is my own view.
In what respect would you say it was not?
In the sense that, look, you came to power. The resources of the state were not being allocated in the way it should be allocated.
Mm-hmm.
2, you had a mechanism for which 25% of contracts should have gone to small contractors. I don't believe we put the supplementary legislation in place to bring that into reality. And I think we needed to define in more clear terms in the law, how is it do we get resources to our people within the confines of the law? You can get resources to your people and then it's done in an illegal way.
When you say our people in that context, who are you talking about?
All Guyanese.
All Guyanese.
But I believe in equity. And therefore, when I say all Guyanese, you have to look at this society, and I've argued this before. Identify the areas with poverty. You have to identify the degree of poverty and then come up with solutions to deal with it. Let's take poor African and poor Indian communities. We make the mistake of assuming sometimes all Indians are wealthy. But as I move around the country, you meet Indo-Guyanese who tell you they are not benefiting.
I'm not assuming you knew that long before.
Yes, but what I can do now is, okay, I could tell you villages I've gone to and what people would have said and what they expect. For instance, one of the things that is chronic in those communities is the tendency for one or two powerful PPP persons to dominate the community at the expense of poor people. And I believe a future government has to take that into consideration and develop programs and policies and then programs to ensure we widen the base of the people who benefit from our economy. And so when I say our people, take the indigenous people. Mm-hmm. I think the David Granger government attempted to teach indigenous people to fish rather than giving them a fish. I've learned from the errors that when you're dealing with something like that, you have to give them a fish at the same time that you teach them to fish. Mm-hmm. Because I believe one of the errors is in our whole, what sometimes I call utopian approach, believing that because your policy is better, it will resonate. But when you're not in you have to find a smooth way to achieve your objectives while not allowing the programs you set to be construed in a negative way. And therefore, the approach to me has to be, yes, you're teaching people to fish, you're educating them on why they should fish, but at the same time, you have to maintain some of the handouts, for the want of a better word, that they would have got until they understand and arrive at the level where they could deal without it.
Any other areas you think that you could have drawn from either positively or negatively?
I think
inherited from the great administration.
Infrastructure, whether we like Patterson or not, I am of the view that he did a good job in infrastructure. He had a more overarching view. But I do believe that there are some areas of focus that as a government we will have to do. For instance, sometimes it comes over as you like doing roads for the sake of doing roads. It is not part of a national plan to link the various regions which will contribute to giving access and opening other lands outside of the coast. I believe our strategy going forward has to be a comprehensive approach to linking the various regions while at the same time opening lands, but that must go with a land use policy. I think too regularly people just do what they think should be done, and there is no land use policy. Which are the lands we will use for agricultural development? Which are the lands we are going to use for housing? Which are the lands for industrial development? Factoring the environmental factors so that you come up with an approach that allows you to open up Guyana. And I believe this intra-national highway program has to be developed. and an APN UFC government in the future will propose an intra-highway program to link the regions so that we can benefit more from the regions.
When you say the region, you mean South America?
No, locally.
Oh, locally.
Or let me give you an example. Guyana should be able to drive comfortably from Georgetown to Leyte. And the cutoff to Region 8 should be proper roads. Remember, every time you do these roads, you are opening up lands.
Yes.
And that is why I say there's need for a land use policy. So as you open these lands, Guyanese will shift away from the coast. I'm one who believe that once the infrastructure is placed in the hinterland and Guyanese can go there easily and come out, you won't have to tell them to leave Georgetown and the coast. They will shift towards the highland, and I think that is one of the strategy we have to use. We have to, in a structured way, shift our people to the highlands, and in whatever land use policy we develop, it must be clear that we not focus on just putting people all over the place. There are going to be areas that you need to protect. There are going to be highlands that you need to use. So it has to be part of that comprehensive infrastructure program. And I believe the government was doing well in infrastructure, but I think infrastructure development, while occurring on the coast, has to be done in a way to allow our people to shift the higher lands, and which will contribute to a reduction in costs for dealing with flooding and a number of other things. We cannot claim to be in the fight against climate change, know the consequences of climate change, but continue to pursue development on the coast.
And pursue oil exploration.
Correct.
Now, legislative agenda. I haven't seen the opposition, and I mean, you're just one person. I haven't seen any indication of legislation being proposed. Like, you've got some outrageous things. This title by prescription, where you could just steal somebody's land and the person only and the law allows a thief to become the owner and deprives the rightful owner of his property, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, on the basis that, oh, he sat on his right. Well, at least you should try and get title. But that's an example, and it's something that bothers me.
But I want to say this about that. Sometimes we have to accept that the opposition doesn't necessarily have all the resources to do what we're talking about. And if you, for instance, propose a legislation, we can look at it and work out a mechanism by which we take it to the parliament, but the originators of it get the credit for it. I am not of the view that as a political party at this stage, or as a APN UFC, that the system is structured to give you the capacity to develop, especially critical legislation. Some small ones you could. For instance, I think we need to review the question of who can sit in parliament. In a country in which I agree that you should serve a certain amount of years in Guyana before you can sit in the parliament.
Okay, 155. Article 155 you're talking about.
I don't agree that we should continue with a system in which, because you have citizenship in another country, then you shouldn't be able to be in our parliament. It robs us of critical resources that we might need. Take somebody like Vincent Adams, assuming he was younger, but to talk about his skills, etc.
Yeah.
As my friend, I can say that. We grew up together. But there should be some mechanism where somebody like him can serve us and there is no barrier. And more importantly, he used to come home virtually every year, sometimes 2 times a year. So he was involved in the Linden Fund. So you saw that he had an interest here.
Yeah.
I believe that we need to start to look in the direction of having legislation that ensure an opportunist doesn't come back from this overseas and run to the pinnacle. But at the same time, we shouldn't have mechanisms that block them from giving the best.
I agree, and that's something that ought to be put on the agenda. The government has to do it and start engaging the public on it.
Yeah.
But you know, the other day I was at a workshop sponsored by the Ministry of the Governance, and one of the proposals that I made, why not have, that was to the government of course, every ministry, now you have shadow ministers, I'm not sure you have a full complement of shadow ministers, but why not have each ministry or each group, like you would have your shadow minister of agriculture, come up, put a team together and come up with specific recommendations for legislative changes.
I agree. It is.
And you know, that's using the skills of the people.
I agree totally. In fact, we have done that in the economic realm. We're doing it in infrastructure. We do have some work being done in oil and gas. I think it has to be done across the board, and it is something that I will continue to work on. But I would say at this stage, I don't think we did enough work in that area.
Well, in the 4.5 months that you've been there, have you developed a legislative agenda that you put to your own people inside your party, then outside to your groups, and then to the country as a whole?
We have a legal committee that is doing the work on the legislative agenda. Once that is done, we will take it to the APNU and the AFC, and then we will move.
What sort of time frame are we looking at?
I am not in a position to say. If you leave me, it should have been done already. But there's a lot of matters being litigated, you know that, and therefore, in some regard, there's an overburden on 1 and 2 persons. What we need to do is to widen it, but I'm hoping that like in a month and a half, we should be able to.
So you're saying at this stage you haven't crystallized and formalized your legislative agenda?
I would say that we have addressed some of the issues that we need to, but I don't think we are ready yet to put before the nation a complete legislative agenda. Do I know we need to do that?
One of the points, well, let me start with it. I'll go back to this one at the top. Understand the function of Parliament. Function and I guess purpose. But I want to ask you about the performance of Parliament in the 2 years since the PPPC came to power.
Well, you know, the PPP operates on a mantra which says, you have your say and we'll have our way. No functioning democratic society can operate like that.
But no functioning leader of the opposition should tolerate that either.
I agree, but you're dealing with Guyana. You have a combination of parliamentary and extra-parliamentary activities to undertake. Now, some of the things we have challenged in the courts. Now, when one looks at what is happening in Guyana, one sees no attempt by the government to allow the legislature to function. Some basic things. It is assumed in parliamentary democracies that complex legislation and legislation that would have far-reaching effects on the society should go to a select committee. In the last hemp bill, we recommended that because of the impact it will have on the society, it should go to a special select committee. The government refused. So basic things that occur in a parliamentary democracy you will find that the government is not prepared to deal with.
Well, why?
Wait a minute.
Go on.
I want to go to the Public Accounts Committee. The decision to change the quorum of the Public Accounts Committee is a backward step. We have debated it in Parliament. We've shown that throughout history, to prevent the government from blocking the work of the Public Accounts Committee, any 3 member used to constitute a quorum. Now, the government has put the legislation in place which says that the government must have a certain amount and the opposition must. And so what the government is doing now, they are not turning up. So once they don't turn up, you're not quorate. Now what has the wider society said about it?
How much does the wider society know about it? Because one of the points you made is you're not getting the oxygen to get your message out. You shut out like your party did, and I think you hinted at that. It didn't think someday it might be in opposition and it will need access to some of that media.
I don't know what is the rationale for it, and I don't want to think about that, but I know in my opinion we should have as a government.
Oh, absolutely. Save resources.
Radio station, television station. We didn't. I have to live with the reality that we didn't and strategize to deal with the fact that we didn't. But the point I'm making about it, a lot of people are obsessed only with oil and gas, while other elements of the society are deteriorating. One, I would have expected that at least the Bar Association, certain civil society groups would have taken a position on this issue, because since 1963, while we were a colony, this question was a question that has been answered, that you cannot give the government the authority to prevent the scrutinizing of the accounts. I cannot recall, Chris, including you, and I have great respect for you, you know,
yes, right,
who have come out and said, this can't promote democracy, this further increases government authoritarianism. The point I'm making here, and we're in the process of meeting out to the trade unions and some other groups, the tendency sometimes is to believe the opposition can do it all alone. The opposition can't. The opposition has to work with civil society, the media, and a number of other areas. Take, for instance, and this is one of my concerns, I have no problem with the media coming to ask me tough questions and I answer. But when you look at the media approach to the government and press conferences, etc., you see that they are not going after the critical questions. So while I'm prepared to accept that the opposition needs to do more, there is need to understand that the opposition is only one element of the governance structure.
Must be the most prominent element and most powerful.
Correct.
It is provided with natural resources.
It is, no, don't go there. The resources are negligible.
All right.
They are nowhere close to what an opposition should get.
You claim, and I'm not defending the private sector, I think, the non-governmental, sometimes I wonder if some of those are mere extensions of the party in power. And I can think of the Private Sector Commission as one of those things. But private sector makes cases. I remember this minimum wage. That $60,000 is an abomination. We have not seen, this society has not seen the opposition, the formal opposition, come out and say, this is completely unacceptable.
Well, then you didn't fall in the opposition.
The appointment of the constitutional bodies.
You weren't falling in the opposition.
No, but you know, it's apart from just stating, we want some serious, the society wants to see you're leading the society. Yes, they have a critical role to play. We have lots of constitutional bodies.
We took a position on this question of wages.
And then what?
And we continue to highlight it. Now, one would expect on this issue, though the opposition is the main opponent, this is a labor matter that the labor movement should be in the forefront of. Wait a minute.
I was about to say, I agree with you.
And we work with them. We work with them. So, yes, the opposition has to carry the fight, but it is the labor that represents the workers that should be doing that, and we give them the support and work with them.
You know, on this, I'm going to defend at least one person.
Norris Witter.
Brother Norris Witter.
Correct, no, I was about to say that.
And Raman McRae, at his own expense, did a food basket. That $60,000 is an abomination.
Yeah, I agree.
It's really a poverty guarantee program. Now, so you talk the appointments of the constitutional bodies, and I'll tell you, Mr. Leader of the Opposition, lots of people feel that you have really not handled this very well.
Okay.
That look, these are important elements of governance. See that it's done. You know, I shake hands and all these things.
No,
let's get to the constitutional. These constitutional bodies.
Let's get to the constitutional bodies. The government sends names. I then ask for CVs so that you can do assessment. My perception of meaningful consultation was that there would have been discussions, and we seek to look at these candidates and determine whether they are suitable. For instance, in the Teacher Service Commission, I had identified to them when the president was trying to tell me, oh, this girl from Linden is one of your Linden people. He didn't know that I knew that she was a PPP operative, and I can't agree for a political operative to be on the Teaching Service Commission. And so meaningful consultation to me has to mean that we look at the people's CV, we look to see what extent they are independent. Look, constitutional bodies are expected to be independent of the state. How could I agree to names that I know are people linked to the governing political party? And so very early I said to them, we need to get an interpretation of meaningful consultation. Under Granger, there were problems with meaningful consultation. Under the present government, there are problems with meaningful consultation. Unless we have a clear interpretation of what meaningful consultation is, apart from just meeting and writing and documenting it, you will always find yourself in a position where the government will name its people, and regardless of what you say, wait a minute, I want to finish. Regardless of what you say, they will go ahead, and then your people who you're representing will say you have no power. I chose in this circumstance to let us have an interpretation of meaningful consultation, so that when we move forward, we just don't rubber stamp.
But already the court, the CCJ had already ruled on this thing about consultation in the Ogle case. Well, I mean, yes, it's important, but I think there's so many... No, I don't know.
Government following that ruling.
No, well, then you should hold on to that. You want to go to court again for it?
Well, you don't have to.
No, but I want to tell you this. I don't think you should wait on, say, Norris Witter or somebody doing a food basket. That's the kind of work the opposition should do. The leader of the opposition and the office of the leader of the opposition and that kitchen cabinet that you have ought to be doing. You talk about these names. Do your own assessment.
We did our own assessment.
Do profiles and say, look, this is when we're talking, this is the person. So I'm suggesting a little bit more proactive work to be done by the opposition rather than being reactive.
Let me say this to you. I was convinced that the government had no interest in meaningful consultation. Wait a minute. The government identified these people and were going to go ahead at all costs. What they wanted was my presence to say they have consulted. Now, I thought we should deal with this issue from the roots. Let us clearly determine what is meaningful consultation.
But as I said, it was already done.
It was already done, but the government does not accept it.
The court will go back and say, look, we already did it. We have already pronounced on the matter.
Can I ask you, did the Chief Justice follow the pronouncements of the court? No, don't escape. I don't want you to escape.
No,
Has the Chief Justice followed the pronouncement of this court in the matter that we filed?
I think the Chief Justice can defend her position, but I think there's enough. No. I'd say there's enough to critique that decision.
Correct.
Negatively. Interesting just now, you made a point about government. Do you now recognize the Ali administration as the legally elected government of Ghana?
Only an election petition can do that. Once the petition is heard and the petition says that there were no irregularities, this was a...
So you don't recognize them?
I'm saying, and I repeat what I've said. We challenge the legitimacy of the government, but we accept that de facto they are the government. But
do you go for this word install? It's a word I've seen coming from the mouths of certain opposition.
In politics, you need these words.
Oh, that's a political thing.
It is.
It's not any legal.
No, it is not legal. But it's political, and we are political parties. We cannot give legitimacy. It is the people and the courts in this case that will give legitimacy. So the word that best describes it at this stage is installed, though there has been some amount of attenuation in the use of the word.
You know that I would say two of the biggest drivers to get the PPPC recognized or declared by GCOM as the victors in the elections were Mia Mockley representing CARICOM and Pompeo representing the United States government. I see, and they made some very, very strong statements. One CARICOM person said, former leader in Jamaica, said it's the most transparently rigged election in history. You're now trying to court these people's support. What do you say to them when they ask you about your embrace of this still, as Trump says, that elections were rigged?
First of all, Trump has no moral right to talk anything about election, and Pompeo is an extension of Trump.
Well, you can say that of the American government.
Okay, an American government.
Yes.
But I'm a politician, I have to live in the real world. My first task of becoming opposition leader is to meet these people, and explain our position to them. Pompeo wouldn't know what happened on the East Coast.
What makes you say that?
Because they will have general information and they will pursue their interests. Look, countries pursue their interests.
Of course.
The United States perceived at the time their interest was with getting the PPP into government through its lobby, etc. Hold a minute. It is my task as opposition leader when I come to meet these people and to put out our case and advocate for change. For instance, we have been able to show them that these people don't believe in good governance. We've been able to establish that you see the re-emergence of the criminal state, drug trafficking, etc. And so one has to identify the weaknesses of the Pompeo government's position. We have to, as political people, know I understand geopolitics And I know a lot of it had more to do with geopolitics than what actually happened in Guyana. And therefore, it was the task of me as opposition leader to meet these people and place their opposition position there with the intention of bringing other dimensions that they might not have looked at to their attention so that we can look at it.
Do you think you have convinced them in any way about the results of the elections?
I did not set out to convince them about anything about the results of the election.
By your presentation.
One of the things I learned from the late Rashley Jackson.
May his soul rest in peace.
Peace. If you go...
He was buried today.
Yes, it's cremated today.
Yeah.
Now, you had this situation where the US government believed X, Y, and Z. You don't come now trying to convince the US government they were wrong. You come identifying the US interests, identifying your interests, and establishing a confluence of interests between these two.
So you don't think if you strongly believe they were wrong, you don't think you should provide the evidence to them? Not necessarily.
It's in the election petition. And what I need to say to them is, whatever influence you have, allow the courts to pronounce on the election petition.
Why is this election petition taking so long?
Well, you know why, Marcus.
No, but this is an absurdity.
But it is true.
The law says it should be held from day to day. It's a matter of urgency.
Yes, but could I say this to you? If the PPP believed they would have won this election petition, they would not have put stumbling blocks in the way. And to the extent that they...
Well, I'm not sure it's there. I mean, the court has to accept some responsibility.
Yes. But don't forget, you have two people that are acting. They are the mercies of the government. They're not truly constitutional in the sense of independence. And therefore, the government has ways and means of ensuring this process is dragged out until they are prepared for what they want to do.
Mr. Norton, would you accept that the denial, first of all, the conduct of some of the election officials, Mingo, Lulu, and Field, and a few others, would you accept that has tarnished, that's one, tarnished the APNU AFC brand among the general population?
Well, first of all, you're making Mingo and then AP and UFC.
No, I'm asking you if you will accept that the attempt to rig the election, or...
I have not accepted any attempt to rig any elections. Mm-hmm. My position is a simple position. We contended that the PPP rigged and was involved in a lot of illegalities the East Coast all around Guyana. The PPP contend that we were involved in illegalities. Let the election petition go through, and the petition will tell us where the illegalities...
But you're not answering my question.
What?
I'm asking you if you would accept or deny that the 5 months delay and the actions taken caused damage to the APNU AFC brand.
I would, like I've said to you, the only way I can do a proper assessment of where that is going, we have put...
No, I'm not asking how you assess it. I'm asking if you think the people
Hold a minute.
have perceived that the brand has been tarnished.
Hold a minute. There are two competing interests. Those who are for the PPP and supported their process will say that. Those who are against will say we were standing up for our rights.
So hold on. So you're saying that in your view, your brand has not been tarnished?
At least not among the people who believe we won the election.
Well, that could be said of Trump's people as well. But I'm talking generally as a country, because as now you're the leader of the opposition of the parliament, not of the APNU, not of AFC, not of just the opposition. Your leader, it's, as you said, is government in waiting.
Good, but
so you don't accept that your brand has been tarnished?
No. What I accept is that the last election had problems, and that for me, We have filed all the evidence in Petition 99, which the government clearly doesn't want to go through. And let's assume with that assessment, it comes out that there were illegalities on the part of the PPP. Then, hold a minute.
Hold
a minute.
Go on.
It will come out where the illegalities were. And wherever the illegalities go, we are prepared to take our responsibility. What I'm not prepared to do is to move from this position, having worked...
Which is not what I was asking.
No, because
I was simply asking you if you think the brand has been tarnished.
No.
That's all my question.
No, I think...
Okay, well, you've answered it.
Okay.
So you don't think as well that the PPP, and you know, whatever we think of them, they're damn good at their politics. That they have taken advantage of this situation and opposition that among many segments of Guyanese society has been discredited to do the very things you're complaining about, ignoring Parliament, doing the wrong thing when it comes to constitutional appointments, making decisions. Don't you think that that has contributed to it as well?
I accept that the PPP would have used it to their advantage. I have no doubt. I also...
And are using it to their advantage.
But I also accept that the PPP is a party that has no interest in principle. It's just hypocrisy. You have before you a Vice News publication. Expose, which establishes that there are allegations of bribery and corruption against the Vice President. Now, has that tarnished their image? You know what? They've rallied behind him, defending him, even though the evidence is leading in a particular direction. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm watching it.
I'm saying to you, every political party will seek to use whatever to their advantage. But principle, if it is done in principle, then a lot will be different. But they say, remember the same election, Nandalal was shouting out, what's the thing he said? Fraud is fraud. And as he saw fraud, he backed away. So let us be clear that this is a political environment in which hypocrisy greases the wheel.
Let me touch on petroleum. We are now the fastest growing economy in the world, built on petroleum, and our gas price at the pump has gone out the roof. We've got the Dutch disease. We've got a framework that belongs to 1986 largely. The Petroleum Exploration and Production Act belongs to 1986. The regulations were passed in 1986. Do you agree that the PNC, the APNO OFC, made a major error in signing a second petroleum agreement to people who were not so entitled?
Now, let me go this thing contextually. You said 1986, it was signed in 1990.
1990, the first agreement.
Wait a minute. In 1999, we were speculating that we had oil. Okay? Now, therefore, whatever agreement emerged in 1999 will emerge against the backdrop of the company taking risk. This is ExxonMobil.
So let's fast forward to 2016 now, because we got 7 minutes more. 7 minutes, 2016.
You want me to leave out the issue, but let me go straight.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We have time limited.
The government had signed one, the previous government. The basis of this agreement was the previous government, you agree? Where I think APNU, AFC should take some heat is more could have been done in 2016.
Would you accept, however?
You didn't even
no. The 1999, and I'm not defending it, But the 1999 was clearly a pre-discovery agreement.
Yes.
The 2016 was a post-discovery agreement, and therefore circumstances had altered dramatically.
I am also saying to you,
do you agree that circumstances
Yes.
had altered?
Yes.
And therefore a model that was good for 1999 was clearly inappropriate to 2016.
wasn't the best for 2016. But I also will say to you that you were in government probably not a full year. And I don't think that we had developed the human resource capabilities to deal with these issues. And that is why every time I make the point about this present agreement, I've said we have cost oil. And one of the things we have to do is to focus on auditing and monitoring cost oil so that we can increase profit oil.
I'm not asking you, Aubrey, to defend the 2016 agreement in any format. No, make that as a qualification.
No, I did not defend it. I'm saying that I think we should have gotten more, but it has to be taken in the context of a government that was in power for under a year.
How could it justify hiding the fact about a signing bonus? How could it justify the existence of the agreement? Raphael Trotman sat on this chair and said, oh, we just tweaked it. That was not true. They hid it for over a year.
Listen to me. This agreement was signed long before we came to power. It is
which agreement? I'm talking 2016 agreement. I'm talking 2016.
Before the 2016 agreement.
No, but I'm talking 2016.
Hold a minute. Before the 2016 agreement, there was an agreement which nobody ever saw.
Which was dated 1999. It was a published document. It was registered in the deed registry.
No.
It was, yes.
So, hold a minute. You're saying to me that the details of ExxonMobil contract were known since 1999?
Yes. It was public since 1999. Whether it was known is a different matter. Now, I would have expected, you might have been an MP during that time as well.
1999? Yes, I was a member of Parliament when it occurred.
Well, because time again, I want to ask you a question. Now, I have some questions.
You're not allowing me to finish answering.
That's all. I'll give you enough of that. You know, you're always welcome.
When it comes to the petroleum sector, you are not allowing me to answer.
All right. No, because we're running out of time. The government is in clear breach of the petroleum agreement as well as the law when it comes to the money in the Natural Resource Fund.
Yeah, I agree.
Article 15.4 clearly requires.
I agree.
Now, what is the APNU AFC, what is Aubrey Nelson going to do about this? Because this is billions of dollars. I estimate it's close, either a little under or over $100 billion that has been improperly accounted for. How does Aubrey Norton confirm that kind of information, and what action does he take?
Well, first of all, we have to rely on the people like you and the county rep, etc. to do it. And then we take legal action against the government.
So you're saying here tonight that you would be prepared to take action?
Yes. Yeah.
The Dutch disease. What is your assessment? How badly has petroleum sector damaged other sectors of the economy? I know you're not an economist.
Yeah, but if you look at the half-year report,
yes,
you will see that there was virtually little or no growth in the other sectors.
Yes.
Now, all of us knew full well that with the coming of oil, there is this tendency for resources to go in the direction of oil.
Yes.
And the government did nothing. I recall us saying, let us invest in agriculture to deal with inflation. When we made our points about not just putting money, there should have been in every region a proper agricultural development program that will contribute to food sustainability. And so you would not have some of the problems you have. I go to the market and we're importing tangerine from Venezuela, mangoes from Venezuela. Wait a minute. We did raise this issue. I'm deeply concerned because also if you're not developing your human resource capabilities, you are encouraging the Dutch disease. You're not doing enough work in manufacturing. And so I am one who believes that the government's approach is, in fact, creating the conditions for Dutch disease. May I add corruption, which plays a critical role.
Fine. The light is on, so we just got, I guess, 1 minute more. The government retains political control over the oil sector. Rather than going for a model petroleum commission, by whatever name called.
Yeah.
What's the party's position on this?
Our party's position is that the resources of this country are better handled by competent people, not necessarily politicians. When we were looking at it, remember we had, I think, a 23-member
Yes.
team, which people felt was too
No, that was not the commission. That was part of the Natural Resource Fund.
But I'm saying that is an indication of where we think it should go. There should be the wider involvement in the society, and there should be a reduction of the power of the government. Mind you, I draw a distinction between government and state.
Yes.
There needs to be a reduction of the power of the government. Too many things in this society, the last say is left with the minister or the president. And I think a commission should be one that reflects civil society, the trade union, the regions, everything, so that more people can make an input. And I believe that it should not be in a situation where the government could dominate and control, or else we'll increase the Dutch disease.
Mr. Albrino, I want to thank you very much
Thanks for having me.
coming and Plain Talk. I know you didn't think you got fair share of it, even though we're check on how much time you were able to speak. But we have other issues to raise, and I would like you to come back to the program.
Like I've said to you, I'm available. Once we work out the time, I will come. But I also said I want to see you bringing government people and asking them their advice.
You have done that.
If you could get them to
You have done that, and I'm so guided. Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. It has been a pleasure having you in our company this evening, and I'll see you next week. Mr. Vincent Alexander, a GCOM Commissioner, academic, former registrar, etc., will be our guest next week. So thank you again, and good night.